All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope some of you can stick around for our last panel. We'll try to make it short and sweet, but I think very interesting. So we are here to talk about the future of mobility. This is a very opportune place to have this conversation, given that Israel is a leader in mobility companies, from electric to autonomous to smart mobility. There's a lot of R&D happening here in Israeli-grown startups and a growing number of investments from international companies here. Last year, the Israeli government approved a national program for smart mobility, and there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of exciting work happening here. So we also are privileged to have an excellent panel today. I'll quickly introduce them and then give you a bit of an overview of the issue before we go into introductory remarks. So first we have David Hoffman, who is the Associate General Counsel and Global Privacy Officer at the Intel Corporation. Next we have Henri Kujala, who's the Global Data Protection Officer at Here Technologies. Then we have Amir Freund, who is the Chief Product Officer at Otonomo, we'll hear a bit about. Limor is the Chief Information Officer at the Tel Aviv Municipality. And last but not least, we have Limor Shmerling, who's Director of Strategic Alliances at the Israeli Privacy Protection Authority. So I'll quickly, and I'm Lauren Smith from the Future of Privacy Forum, where I run our Connected Cars project. So to do some quick scoping of this issue, this panel will cover the future of mobility generally. So that includes connected cars, which we're already seeing being sort of sold off of the lots today, and extends to autonomous cars, extends to growing interest in ride-sharing options, from bikes to scooters to autonomous vehicles. The sky is really the limit here, including some flying cars that we've seen discussed recently from companies like Uber and Kitty Hawk. So the big prediction that this issue sort of touches on is that transportation is predicted to change more in the next 5 years than the last 50. And that's sort of a phrase that's thrown a lot at conferences that we go to around mobility, and there are a couple of different elements to this. So some is predicated on the development of some new technologies that weren't accessible before, such as LiDAR, such as the opportunities enabled by artificial intelligence and machine learning, that can enable faster, smarter decision making that can aid or replace a human in a vehicle, which provides a lot of benefit to potentially reduce the 94% of car crashes that involve some sort of human error. And then these sort of feed into some other sort of paradigmatic shifts in how we're starting to think about transportation and the structuring of ownership and mobility in public life. Many predict that when it comes to cars, the ease of ride sharing and the cost of autonomous vehicles may contribute to a world where we shift from an ownership model of cars to a fleet-based model, where we subscribe to a service rather than owning cars, which will bring a big culture shift in the US as well as around the world. One of the most consistent pieces of each of these shifts is that all of these new technologies involve growing generation and use of data. This is an infographic that FPF pulled together last year, mapping out the data flows in the connected car. Our basic takeaway is that data in the car is not entirely new. There's been black boxes. But there's been a massive growth in the variety of data involved, in the volume of data involved. Intel has said that autonomous cars can generate up to 4 terabytes of data per day, as well as a growth in the connectivity. So information that previously may have stayed on the car can now be shared with a growing number of parties. So there are a lot of interesting issues that arise around technology policy to enable these innovations and around data and privacy. And lucky for us, we are not only in the right place, but we have the right people. So we'll start by kicking off to David from Intel. So David, Intel is a tech company that has a bird's eye view of the mobility and tech ecosystem, or should I say a drone's eye view. And you're also a company that has looked to Israel for a lot as a source of innovation. So can you talk to us about how you've thought about the future of mobility and how you're seeing this play out here?
Sure. Thanks a lot, Lauren. First, I would like to thank you and thank Jules and Omer for inviting me here to speak and putting on this conference today. And the formation of the Institute and doing the work that the Institute will be taking on, I think, is absolutely critical as we do create the policy environment to be successful in bringing about these technology innovations out into the market. And so there's, I think, a particular reason why Israel is the absolute right place to have this discussion. One of my maxims of public policy that I like to say is that difficult problems rarely have easy solutions. And so you want to come into this realizing there's going to be a lot of nuance that we're going to have to get into to find ways that we create that public policy environment. What better place to do innovation and then in an environment that realizes that some of the most important work that needs to be done is going to be challenging and difficult, and to bring that energy and will to that. Intel has an understanding of that because we've been in Israel now for over 30 years. The commitment to the company, we've invested billions of dollars in our semiconductor fabs here and in investing in the startup innovation environment here in Israel. And our executives from our Israeli operation have helped form our new technology strategy that we see for the company and developing in the world. And I just want to lay that out for a bit because I think it's critically important for the way that we see mobility. What we're moving towards is what we like to describe as a data-centric environment. And as a computing company that supplies the infrastructure that then does the compute for that data, what we're trying to do is to maximize the ability for different organizations to engage in that data-centric activity in a way that's going to provide real value to individuals at the end. So we see three different factors coming into play to help create that. Number one, what we like to call the edge-to-cloud environment. So if you're thinking about more power and compute power to manage data at the individual edge device, whether that's a phone, whether that's a drone, whether that's a PC or laptop, or whether that's a car, much more capability there. And then going all the way back to the cloud and the data center and driving more compute power there. That's the first transformation that we see playing out. The second is the fact that that compute and that environment and that data flow is all happening at a global level, and it's critical that it does happen at a global level to allow the compute to happen in the most effective place with the right aggregation of data to derive the greatest value. And the third dynamic is an advance in analytics. Oftentimes we're talking about part of that advance in analytics that we're calling artificial intelligence, but the idea that the advance in analytics is not just happening at the edge, it's not just happening back in the data center, but it's happening all the way across the infrastructure to allow the right level of compute and the right inferences from the data to happen at the right place and location, depending upon what the organization needs, how much data is available, and how much compute power and energy and memory space is available at that particular time. So if that's the overall environment that we're going to, where you're going to have much more capability at the edge, which is going to drive the ability for more data to come back through the infrastructure and go to the cloud, for more inferences and learning to be generated from that, to drive that back out to the edge, to provide for more advanced and interesting services at the edge, you get a cycle that flows, developing huge opportunities for people, but also huge implications for the individual and organizations. Intel's investing in three main mega initiatives really to take advantage of that. One being advances in artificial intelligence, particularly investment in the silicon for artificial intelligence. Second, 5G, so increased capability for the transmission of the data, whether that's wireless connectivity and spectrum or wired transmission. And third, and most important for our conversation, autonomous driving, one aspect of mobility. So just to close this overview, I'd want to come back to what Jeff Jarvis said in his original opening keynote today when he said the internet is not really the New York Times, it's more like Times Square. And I think that's actually really interesting from this perspective, and what I'd say is I remember New York in the 1980s. I remember what Times Square was like, before there was actually really effective rule of law operating in Times Square. I got mugged in Times Square in the 80s. It was not all that pleasant of an environment. What happened to Times Square was that government worked with the private sector to oppose rule of law and to encourage companies to come in and to invest in Times Square. And it's made for one of the best environments in the entire world for people to come for entertainment and to do business. This is the opportunity that we have available to us now if government and the private sector can come together with civil society and describe how do we provide the right rule of law, the right democratic structures around it to allow companies to invest in the innovation in that overall ecosystem that I just described, then we're really going to be able to do great things.
Great. Henri, here Technologies plays a really interesting role, both in terms of the services that you provide as well as the sort of studies and research you've done on the role of location data in this ecosystem. Can you give us a bit of an overview?
Yes. Thank you, Lauren. So first I would like to introduce here, because not many of you may know what we are about. And nowadays we also add the word technologies behind because the word here means something else to many of you, so now we are called Here Technologies. We have a 30-year history in mapping and location-based services, so we come from age of Philips first, and then it was Nokia, and now we're an independent company since a few years now. We mostly build APIs. We have a small subset of consumer business, but mostly our business is B2B, and it's focused on, as said, mapping and location-based services. But now more and more also looking into autonomous driving and also pooling data from a fleet of vehicles. So we have today about 500,000 vehicles in the street, pooling sensor data into the platform, out of which we are then building services. Services like real-time traffic, which is a very common example, but also local hazard warnings. So if, for example, a vehicle is informing of a hazardous event, then that helps other vehicles nearby to notice of the same. This is one example of a pooled service. And then we are also building an open location platform, which is meant to help every data provider to bring their data into the platform and visualize it, cross-reference with other data, create new innovative datasets and analytics. So with the open location platform, we believe that we can connect data providers and data consumers in the future world. Like you were also referencing Professor Jarvis, I would also like to say that we believe that the future of mobility is also in personalization. Like Professor Jarvis was saying that the future of journalism is in personalization. Similarly, future of mobility is in personalization. So mobility will require lots of processing of personal data in the future. Like, take a few examples. So when you choose your journey, you might prefer the quickest route, the cheapest route, the most green option maybe the most privacy-friendly way. I don't know whether we can offer that today, but that could be one cool option that you could choose the most privacy-friendly way to commute. In the mobility world, we can distinguish at least 3 or maybe 4 levels of providers. So we have the infrastructure side that is then helping to provide the commute or the mobility function, data and service providers, and then aggregation services. On this last element, we have a unit here in Israel, a mobility unit that is focusing on building mobility services and also creating this kind of aggregation service. We call it the mobility marketplace, and this is supposed to be an open marketplace in which we can connect the demand and supply side. So you can have supply services providing their transportation capabilities to the marketplace, and then you have your demand side who is then looking for the demand, i.e. a hotel concierge, for example. On the study you mentioned, Lauren, so just a brief reference, we did a consumer study on privacy attitudes or attitudes to privacy in context of location data in March this year. We surveyed over 8,000 individuals across eight different countries, and that indicates, like already discussed and highlighted today as well, that the lack of transparency is a concern. It's a real concern by individuals. 76% of the consumers surveyed feel that they are concerned overall in sharing their location data. 44% share unintentionally, so they don't even know that they are sharing. 80% do not fully trust the service provider. 75% are not sure what happens to the data, again highlighting lack of transparency. Yet 66%, so 2/3, would be more willing to share more data if they would know for what purpose it is about. So again highlighting the need for transparency. And also, yet only 22% of users actually check their settings. So we do seem to also be able to prove that there is this paradox that people want more privacy, but then they are not willing to do much efforts to control it. Additionally, what we surveyed here is that we believe that in this autonomous world, there is a place for privacy services or assistance. And yes, this study also assures that over 50%, so between 63 and 65% of individuals would like to have a privacy manager or privacy service in which they could manage their preferences. Now, then switching that back to the mobility side. So knowing that the mobility ecosystem is as large as it is, and knowing that transparency is very important, how can we provide better transparency? How can we build services with better transparency? So, and also it's a question that who provides the transparency? So in the context of the hotel concierge, when you are going to a concierge to book a taxi, do you ask for the privacy policy? Not sure any of us would do that, but it would be the place to ask for the transparency. But out of this audience, I don't believe that any one of us has ever done that. Just as an example. So we seek for transparency, but we don't take the effort to actually look for it.
Great, thank you. So Amir, Otonomo markets itself as sort of the first connected car data marketplace. Can you tell us about the company and how you're thinking about the future of this space?
Sure. Hi, everybody. So Otonomo is a startup, Israeli startup company. We're about 2.5-year-old. And our focus is really to enable scaling and to enable the creation of value from automotive data. And so we don't have anything in the car. We don't have our dongles or hardware or software in the car. We actually sit between the data providers, which are mainly OEMs and TSPs. And on the other side, we have tons of different services that all can use data. And we try to enable this ecosystem to actually monetize the data in the right way. So, so the right way is, of course, to first put the driver and the vehicle owner at the center of the thinking, and it's all about doing good for those entities. And that's part of our identity and part of what we believe in. And then it's about understanding the ecosystem and what they want to do and how they can do it and so on. We split the world in one way into two. It's about anonymous usage of data, anonymous data-based services, and personalized. Anonymized, maybe best example is smart cities. So if you want to give a smart city information about dangerous junctions, and you just monitor where people are doing hard brakes. So that's information that really doesn't need to know anything about the specific driver that was doing it, and it's aggregated, and it's easy to provide it and to create value. So we are sitting, on one hand, we're getting a lot of data into our platform, and we are providing that, let's say, to Smart City in this format. We create value, we get back value, which goes back to the provider, and we cut part of it, and this is how we make the revenues. It can be personalized services, and maybe the best example is a service that was launched by GM and Amazon recently to deliver goods to the vehicle. So instead, meaning you buy some appliance to the kitchen, and instead of the delivery, the courier calling you that he's just at the front of your door and there's nobody home at 11 o'clock before noon because you're at work. So instead of doing that, and there's no place in your outside place to put it, instead of that, they can come to your vehicle, which is 9 hours every day at this parking lot, and put it inside the vehicle, and somebody needs to enable that courier to know the location of the vehicle, make sure that it's in the parking and it's not driving right now, and actually open the trunk and close it. And that's a very private thing that someone that you don't know is going to open your vehicle. So we have a platform that sits in the center and actually enable all of this to happen, enable the service to start, enable to pass just the data that is required, enable to make sure that you gave consent to open your trunk, but also actually make sure that once the service is done, the courier cannot anymore get access to your data. And that's about enabling the industry to go and do it because it's a headache. And as a startup, we like headaches. This is where we make our success from others people or corporates' headaches. And the other thing, we help to scale it. Because believe me, it is so difficult for a large OEM to do integration with a large service provider, and certainly with small ones. So this is where we come in the middle. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So now we'll shift a little bit more to the government perspective. So Limor talked to us from the city perspective. You know, many folks have argued that mobility data can go a long way towards enabling more efficient, sustainable, equitable cities, new service models, but obviously there are questions about privacy and how to manage that to enable these services. So we'd love to hear your perspective.
Just to begin and say that I think we do not have to do anything because there's no transportation problem in Tel Aviv, right? Nothing. No load problems, no parking problems, nothing. So everything is optimistic. I have a little problem on the way myself, on the way from home to work, from Kfar Saba to Tel Aviv, but that's a private issue. But saying that, I will say that I'm optimistic about the future, and that is based on, I think, 3 pillars. One of them is first the action that we in Tel Aviv municipality already do, and the plans that we have for the future. And first, I have to emphasize that the responsibility in the transportation area lays more on the government level and not on the municipality, so we are a little bit limited, but limited as we are, we can do a lot of things. And a few things that we already have done is first the car sharing project, Ototel, which was issued a year ago, the bike sharing project, Telefan, a lot of bike lanes that were issued around the city, a very nice open data platform, and I will speak a little bit about the layers that we expose in the open data. And we have a very smart traffic light system that changed the traffic lights around the city according to a few sensors. But although we have done a lot of things, we just finalized a smart city program for the next 10 years, and we understand that as a municipality, we have to work together with the government, but issue solution inside the municipality as well, not wait for the government, try to encourage them, try to set policy that we think is right, but issue project in-house because we can do a lot of things inside the municipality, although we don't have the responsibility. And the vision that we have set has several stages: the connected area, the sharing economy of transportation, of course trying to encourage electric solution inside the municipality and try to encourage autonomous first experiments and then driving a lot on the city. So first is the things that we have done and the plans that we have for the future in the municipality. The second issue is the rapid technology achievement that we see, and again, city policy guidelines that big cities around the world adopt to try to make a change around the city. We see it in London, in Paris, and so on. And I'm sure that we in Israel will try to copy the guidelines and set rules in the city as well. And I see a third and very bright light trying to shine. This is the big focus and funds from the government level. We have seen a smart transportation program from the government level with significant funds, with trying to issue a lot of pilots, advanced pilots. So trying to calculate the big picture, I think that in the future will make more significant action in order to resolve the problem of transportation.
Great, thank you. So Limor, as a data regulator, hearing all of this promise and excitement about the future mobility, how are you viewing this future and what are you focusing on?
Okay, so as a privacy and data protection regulator, then this is an area which is very interesting in terms of data protection, since it's very data-centric, potentially, and is developing now. We're reviewing the first stages and the rollout and the potential that's going to be broad spread in the coming years. And this is something that is expected to be a public infrastructure. If projections are correct, then we'll see less and less regular transportation and more autonomous shared public transportation. So firstly, as a regulator, when I look at this, I see responsibility for governments and for industry, since public infrastructure is something that we have to make sure is available to the public and is not constrained by any sort of demands that are not, shouldn't be applicable when we're talking about a public infrastructure. So we have an opportunity, I think, in this area to implement privacy by design principles and to understand this situation as it occurs. We have an opportunity to learn from the lessons that we're seeing in other industries in the past few years. We already have lessons and experiences and insights from other industries utilizing data, perhaps misusing data. We have seen adverse effects of the data processing of various industries, and we can learn from that and implement these lessons, and this is a perfect time to do that. So I don't think data protection and privacy should mean we should put stops on smart mobility. It means we can right now learn and be smarter, both in mobility and in regulation, and implement the startup regulation right now. So this is a huge opportunity. When I look at data in the mobility sector, I think we should identify two major uses of data that I see as should receive different handling. There's primary data. Primary data, in my opinion, is the data that is required for the mobility transportation to take place. To have autonomous cars not colliding into one another, we need data from sensors and from data recorders within vehicles in order to not have people injured or property injured. So this is a primary use. We have to facilitate the transportation. That's the first reason why we have transportation, to take people from one place to another place. And secondary uses are maybe monetizing of data that is accumulated along the way, because going back to the horse and carriage, there was no data, and we just wanted the horse and the carriage to take people from one place to another. And now we have something which is different, which creates additional potential value, but also creates additional potential risks to the rights of people. Now, a few of the huge advantages of the future of smart mobility are, as far as I've read, cutting tens of percentage of collisions, since it's been stated that 90% of accidents happen because of the human factor. So if we're able to move into smart mobility and stop accidents and people getting hurt and property getting hurt, that's perfect. There will be perhaps less pollution. We would have better transportation for those who have disabilities, for people who are unable to drive. We have great benefits here. But this only makes a stronger point and case that this is a public infrastructure, that the public should not be exploited within. And if we're talking, for example, about consent, within the environment of secondary uses of data within the ecosystem of smart mobility, then if this is a public infrastructure, then I don't see how we can have people consenting to the data usage freely and expressing their actual wishes when they are perhaps underprivileged populations needing to get to work. So we have to be very cautious that within this great effort to have better mobility and to get all of those advantages, we are not putting people in a place of disadvantage. And I think that we've heard a lot today about the importance of dialogue and engagement between industry and government and civil society, and that is absolutely true. And I think that the development of regulation within this area must include all actors. But I think industry has to accept that this will require a very high level of transparency towards government, since in general, as regulators, we are many times disadvantaged. The industry knows better what's going on inside their software and hardware, and in order for us to create the good regulation and the right regulation that is suitable to this use case, we need to receive cooperation and transparency from industry. And we've also seen in other cases or other industries that this was not always perfectly handled. So, thank you.
Great, thank you. So Limor closed on a note that I think is a good segue to our first round of questions. So when we're thinking about mobility data, broadly, sort of how do we define what is personal? We've talked about a couple of different versions of that so far, but we could open up to the panel and say generally, how do we unlock some of the great utility of this data without creating personal privacy concerns? I know in the US there's been sort of inquiries for ride-sharing data that then through public information requests can create privacy risks. Geolocation data can sort of be inherently sensitive, but there are ways to enable data sharing both with municipalities, between companies, with individuals that can help move this ecosystem forward. Sort of from a technical as well as a policy perspective, how do folks think about how to sort of separate and distinguish this treatment and use of data? Sure.
So first of all, there is no one definition of what is anonymous data and what is personal data. And you can ask someone whether information without your name, address, phone number, license plate, or what is called VIN, the identity of the vehicle, if you don't have that, this is something which is anonymous? In some areas, like in the US, you might get an answer yes for that. In Europe, you'll probably get no. You'll probably be told that if there is more than 1 hour of continuous geolocation data, it's already not private because someone can do an algorithm and gets information about you. So I believe that right now this area is very open, and probably there will need to be several lawsuits until we'll actually know what is allowed and what is not allowed in specific geography or even a specific time And we saw that also in other areas, like IP rights. So are you allowed to copy a news from one newspaper and put it in your website?
I mean,
It's all
that's
about,
perfect. I recently heard in the past few weeks industry calling for regulation. Now I'm hearing industry calling for suits.
So I'm not
And
calling
that's
for
not
that.
regulators and government talking.
But yes, but it's not about calling that. It's about understanding that there is vagueness,
Okay.
and it's about understanding that when you develop a solution, you need first to keep in mind who are you wanting to do good for. And for us, it's about the driver or the vehicle owner. So when we look at issues like anonymization, and on the other hand, we want to create value, because at the end, the whole economy plays role in the capability of government to grow the services, and of course, the industry to grow. So when we look at that, we say, okay, we will not select just one anonymization technique. We'll actually have in our platform 10 different anonymization techniques that we believe that are all very strong and comply to GDPR. And we will just use the one that doesn't hurt the information that is required by a specific service. So it's about thinking about that, or it's about thinking that the way that we'll enable the industry is we'll enable every OEM to put inside a very strong consent mechanism that is open, and we'll enable it to the OEMs to use it at very minimal effort. So if we create that, then we enable the industry, and we are not calling for it, on the contrary, but we're trying to find a balance there.
Thanks. I would maybe just want to disagree with the definition part, but then agree on the implementation. So I do think that we do have the definitions in the laws, and they are as they are. So personal data is any information that is identified or identifiable to an individual. However, the part identifiable is the one that we then have the anonymization discussion about. So to what extent is the identifiability, or does it take place? And there is where we have it's not a binary choice. So it's not a 0 or 1, but it's a question about possibility, about probability. So it's a question about probabilities and risk. So at the end, when we talk about data use, we need to understand that there may not be a one-size-fits-all approach, like you said. They are always fit for context, and there is always a balance between the loss and the utility. So if you want to achieve the perfect anonymization technique, you end up in a situation that your loss is humongous versus the utility, and you end up in a data set that is non-usable. So that's what we're balancing. So we're balancing the risk versus the loss and utility. And from the business perspective, we want to have utility, but to balance the loss and still to manage the risk. That's how I see it.
I'll try to emphasize the point of view of the municipality. First of all, we have operational data, which is not personalized at all. For instance, we at Tel Aviv, we expose at the open data details about our telephone bicycle station, how many bicycles are open or available at each one of the stations. It's not personal at all. We have the same thing with parking lots, to see in the municipality parking lots how many places are available and how many are occupied. It's not personal at all. We are working on what we see as a very important data, trying to open our traffic light data. So startups and companies will try to take into account when the traffic light is changing to green, and then maybe it will encourage autonomous experiment and so on. So that is not personal as well. So every data that we have operational, it's not really personal data. And even if we try to analyze a little bit of trends, and then we do not need the personal data at all. The only place that I, as a municipality, may use personal data is when I'm going to try to give a better service to each one of my residents, to give him a better service. And in that case, what I will do is really to ask him if I can use his data in order to give him a better services. He can say yes, he can say no, and I will act according to his decisions. So I think if you look at that perspective, maybe it's an easy question to ask.
Great. Is this microphone working? No. Let's jump back to this one. So as we think about, what tech policy should look like in this space, both when it comes to mobility generally, but also the role of data in the future mobility, what do folks on the panel think that industry's role should be? What should government's role be when looking at sort of enabling this sort of emerging industry, but including, protections that protect consumers?
First, I think one of the things I just want to note, which I think is a very forward-leaning perspective, coming back to the traffic light data, I think for government to start thinking right now, more than just playing the regulatory role, but also playing the enabling role to allow this to happen and to provide guidance. The amount of data that government has and the ability that government could have to understand how can we share this data, how can we encourage the development of APIs for the sharing of the data, but then also do that in ways that does protect some of the data from being able to potentially relate to an identifiable individual in the future, I think is absolutely going to be critical. When I spoke earlier about artificial intelligence being deployed at different places in the infrastructure to gather inferences, that could be a real privacy-enhancing method depending upon where the inferences are created, that the data doesn't need to flow past that, just the inferences might need to flow past that. That's a real role that government could play with the data the government has now, or the data that government could have if it started seeing that it had its own data strategy to be able to enable and empower economic growth, particularly in this sector. I would then say one thing I think industry really can do, and I think today is a great day, noting that it's happening, is come together to help create discussions like this and work, Lauren, like that you're doing with the infographic, to start describing some of those best practices, working through specific use cases and saying, here's how we can still use very innovative use of data while still allowing that innovative use to be ethical.
Okay. So I'll just add on to that the Israeli government has actually, and that's not a credit to us as a Privacy Protection Authority, we were partners, but this is something that the Israeli government has passed a decision on and is led by the ICT in the government, has decided to actively encourage all ministries of the government to release data sets for academia and civil society to be able to use. And this has been going on for the past 2 years at least. And in this decision, privacy measures were introduced under cooperation with us, with the Privacy Protection Authority. And there is a cross-government effort to be more transparent to the public, to publicize responsibly data sets and make them available to the public. And this is, there's a government site, gov.il, where you can go and see data.gov, and you can see various data sets from various ministries. And this is something that has been going on for a while now. And very actively, the ICT is approaching the computer units of the various ministries, stressing that they need to report how many have they have goals set for them in order to make this a reality, and it's happening right now.
Great. Well, we'll close with one quick question. I'll ask that we can go down the line and everyone say what you're most optimistic about with the future of mobility and what brings you the greatest concern. Hopefully one sentence each.
Reading and working all the way to my office every morning instead of stopping myself from looking at the mobile while driving in traffic. And I think that's what I'm most concerned about, since at least I'm listening to music on the way to work and not working, so that's also a concern.
I think the most optimistic for me is the technological advance that we see in the last years in the area of transportation, and it will continue and it will increase. So we'll have some solutions available at our hands. It will be up to us to adopt them. That will be a big decision. And again, my personal nightmare is the day-to-day drive every day to work, and when I'll get the decision to move to a more advanced transportation.
For me, it's about understanding that what's happening in automotives are really things that change the life habits. And I believe that the optimistic side of it is that whenever something like this happens, a lot of value is created. And a lot of value is created for the people, and a lot of value is created for the industry, and a lot of value is created for countries and municipalities, and so on. And this is what's happening. And of course, the worrying thing is how long it will take.
Thanks. I would say that for me, the benefits would be like already mentioned, the potential improvements in safety, environmental side, lack of pollution and so on. And then the concerns would be, well, because of data protection background, that this doesn't become a surveillance society when everything is interconnected all the time.
I guess what I'm optimistic about is that I see lots of people actually taking the OECD privacy principles from the 1980s and now applying them to rethink how we do privacy in a way that we can really use data efficiently and effectively. And I think that's very exciting. If I have any concerns, I think the concern is about to really fully take advantage of that, we're going to need data to flow globally. We're going to need to take advantage of the diversity of data that comes from locations like Israel and India, and have those be combined in data sets with data from Europe. And I am concerned, and we heard a lot about it on the earlier panels, about things like the Schrems decision and what the implications are for global data transfer.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. Thanks everyone for sticking around. You can come ask questions afterwards if you have any follow-ups, and we'll toss it over to Jules.
Well, I'll close with two things. Obviously there's a lot to be excited about when it comes to mobility. What I worry about is that you can easily see how the concerns can dominate some of the policy discussion, and regulators and civil society and then consumers at the end of the day could worry about my insurance, surveillance, will I get ads based on where I go, all the things you read in the media that can really create an overhang for a very careful ecosystem that needs sensitivity, needs rules. Amir, maybe the way we avoid some of the litigation that can give us the certainty is by getting the collaboration among folks like at this table, and let's come up with these hard questions. What is the right level of de-identification based on the utility in particular circumstances, based on certain uses? Maybe we want to be a little riskier about de-identification if we have some other policy protection, law, great social utility. Maybe in other places, if it's marketing or something else, we want very high standards of certainty. We see regulators around the world seeing this data, some of them seeing it for smart cities, but some of it seeing for, oh, I want to regulate. Where are the company, where is traffic going, and so on and so forth. So you can see that we will have tensions, and it really takes this combination. And again, we've heard the theme all day that this can and should happen in Israel. In mobility in particular, this is where it is happening in Israel by companies that are partnering with OEMs around the world. And some companies are saying, I'm the small startup, the OEM will make this big decisions, but the reality is, I think most of us understand, very often the tail does wag the dog. It's the companies that know where the data is, and in my experience, a lot of the OEMs are our members. In my experience, when a vendor shows up, they're not insulted that the vendor says, listen, here's what the rules should be, needs to be done respectfully, but they typically appreciate, we're sophisticated about the data, here's how we've seen the risks, and here's how we're going to handle it, and you won't have the problems you're concerned about because we think it through. Now, there's a lot of negotiation between this and that conclusion. Okay, if you haven't joined our email list so that you can stay in touch and we can keep you apprised of the other projects that we're doing in Israel, please come up and I will scan you. And in a minute or so, we'll do a little drawing and I will outside provide a copy of our delightful consumer privacy handbook. Omer, all of our panelists, all of you who are with us today, thanks for the sort of relaunch of the Tech Policy Institute, and we look forward to being in touch with you. Later out.